Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development, where we share original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. We hope you join us often for practitioner-oriented content around all things related to leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with Human Capital Innovations Podcast. If you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations Podcast, enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page, and please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. In this HCI Podcast episode, I talk with Daniel Sims about a new model for DEI education. Daniel Sims, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you for having me, John. It's great to be here.
It is a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Wisconsin. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and more specifically, a new model for DEI education that you've been working on and working with organizations and leaders. As we get started, I wanted to share Daniel's bio with everybody. Daniel Sims is the founder and CEO of Daniel Sims Consulting Group, where he connects data-driven DEI strategies to organizations seeking transformational system change. Daniel has nearly 15 years of experience in fundraising, coaching, strategic planning, and DEI education. He has managed over 140 campaigns, trainings, and strategic plans, raising over $425 million and training over 5,000 stakeholders. Daniel also believes in giving back to his community through board service. He has served on several local, national, and international boards and committees, including the Access Community Health Centers, the Association of Fundraising Professionals, a Community Empowerment Network, and as board president of BOSS, Building Opportunities for Student Success, an organization dedicated to connecting students of color with internship opportunities in architecture and design. Daniel holds a Master of Public Service from the University of Arkansas Clinton School of Public Service, is a certified development and nonprofit executive, and is a member of Forbes The Culture. He resides in Madison, Wisconsin with his wife and collaborator, Althea, 2 children, Andrea and Seth, and family dog, Kobe Biscuit. I love it. Love it. Awesome. Wonderful to be with you. Anything else you would like to share with me or my audience by way of your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation?
Yes, I also love Magic the Gathering, and it actually plays a big role in my work because it's a card game by Wizards of the Coast, now owned by Hasbro, and I use a lot of allegories and stories of that in my trainings and my writings, and so I'm always like to throw that in.
Oh, super interesting. I'm not familiar with that, but that sounds super fun, and I think it's always great to be able to connect to those sorts of things when we're doing trainings with people. Wonderful. Well, why don't we start with you sharing a little bit of a background around what led you to develop a new model towards DEI education. Now, of course, diversity, equity, and inclusion, the acronym has changed over the years, the focus has changed over the years, but the conversations have been happening for a really long time. And in the current iteration, I see a lot of positive things, but I also see some gaps and some limitations to what people have been doing, what leaders have been trying to accomplish, and how organizations have been carrying forward their DEI efforts. So tell us a little bit about your what's led to your development of this new DEI education model.
It was really, I would call it a perfect storm of working with groups across the spectrum of the services I provide, whether it be fundraising, campaign management, strategic planning, on ways to bring more voices to the table. And I found a fairly consistent theme throughout that people wanted to add voices to spaces that weren't equipped to hear those voices, honor the opinions, thoughts of those voices, and then actually memorialize policies and systems and processes based on what they're learning. And so as I looked at what I understand about how we build process to create, succinct and crisp programmatic cultures, mission-driven cultures, what I found was that we approach DEI from a place of expansion. We want to be a big tent so that everyone can be in a space, but very seldom, and the conversation is changing now. People are not always thinking about how that applies to how we do the work once people and voices and experiences that are different from our own are present in these organizations. So I looked back to data. How do we actually quantify where an organization is in terms of their mastery of JEDI? And I use justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion in my work. But as you mentioned, there's DEIB, DEIA, and several others that are all working towards that same end game. But I wanted to take data from both, conversations, but also from surveys and things and data points within organizations to say between the 100 and the 500 level, for example, if it's the 100 level with mastery and understanding, you're very basic, you need a lot of support. Very few people are at that 500 level where they've got it all figured out and can really take the charge. But the gap is in that 200 to 300. What are the ways that conversations need to change within workplaces? How do we consistently provide safe spaces to surface what we believe and what our values are, both personally and professionally, and then translate that into programmatic change that works, that lasts, and is also measurable, so that we're continuing this iterative design thinking based change to keep organizations in front of any challenge that could threaten the type of work they want to do by limiting the number of people and the number of experiences that we allow.
I like the idea of being able to be as inclusive, to bring voices around the table, to involve people, but that also we need to get beyond just the conversations, and we need to move to greater levels of influence and impact and systemized approaches to justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, if you're using the JEDI model or whatever acronym you're using. So tell us a little bit more specifically about how the model works, how it can be used to transform program development and evaluation within teams and within organizations.
Absolutely. So the Alan Zim's model, as we call it, has kind of 4 quadrants that work in concert with one another. We start at the discovery phase, very much with assessment-based tools. We use a tool called Mosaic that's essentially a battery of 6 different evaluations coming from personal experiences in the workplace through one-on-one interviews or surveys, all the way to how we're looking at salaries and other types of HR driven data points. That we use that data then to translate our JEDI assessment score, where we then curate what are the specific types of educational and program management needs an organization needs to focus on in the understanding phase. So we create safe spaces to facilitate people understanding language, people understanding how their roles within an organization are imbued with or should be guided by DEI values, and largely showing that DEI values and value systems, most value systems that are centered in civility and goodness, align much more than usually the social or political discourse of the day allow them to prove. I think that's a good way to say that. So we're taking the information that we're learning in those training courses, and then working with the strategic plans and other guiding documents to say, based on what we're finding, what are the specific planks of program life or HR or other quadrants within the organization that need change. And so then using all of this data that we're continuing to gather almost in real time, we're then able to provide recommendations on how we change pay structure. What does it look like to change the recruitment standard, but then also provide, for example, mentorship and other types of wraparound support when we bring people into organizations. We then, at the end call it, it's not really an end game because this is a continual iterative process, but we come to a place of cultural reckoning. We take all of the information we do, and then we offer the mosaic, battery of assessments again at the end. So usually we're 6 months or a year, sometimes more, into the process, and we can then demonstrate in a data-driven way the change that we've seen in the systems and in the people that are managing those systems. And it also then allows us to surface other issues or potential issues that can continue to be worked on using the model.
Yeah, and that assessment is so vital in ongoing evaluation and just thoughtful reflection on what's working and what's not working. And perhaps what have you found as you've worked with organizations using this evaluation and assessment tool and helping them as they're trying to improve their JEDI or DEI efforts? What have been some of the biggest gaps that you've been able to identify through the use of the tool?
A few immediately jump to mind. The first thing that we saw is that people, and this is why we tend to use the language that we use, that people feel that they didn't have the space to fail and learn how to change language and in terms of having conversations and how we interact with people in the workplace. And so, the way that we approach our training, my wife comes from an education background and a social work background. And so when we're working together, we have the tools and structures in place to create therapeutic-like space so that people can feel safe asking questions that seem hard or saying things that seem hard, and that there's a level of appreciation for that. And there's a direct correlation between that appreciation and how social environments and workplaces change from the initial mosaic application to our end application. A second thing that we find more often than not is that organizations have struggled to align DEI priorities in their organic strategic plans. And so we provide language and strategies to make DEI part of all the natural direction that a company or an organization is heading in. I'm sure you can Google any number of places right now that have a standard strategic plan and then a DEI specific plan that makes it a lot easier to be frank, ignore or not focus on or invest in as heavily. And so by holding an organization and its leadership accountable by looking at how we're integrating the values and the beliefs that an organization agrees on through this process, it has increased exponentially the amount of long-term DEI investment and programming that we see from organizations that we've worked with. So those are probably some of the biggies that we continue to find.
Yeah, both of those are very consistent with all the conversations I'm having with leaders in organizations. And when I think about that second one specifically around, just making sure that there's alignment between the overall organizational strategic pillars and our efforts in the inclusion space, that so often is very much lacking. So finding that alignment is going to be really important as first step towards dismantling structures of oppression and being able to create the mechanisms, the structures, the systems that are actually going to promote true justice and equity and opportunities for inclusion and belonging within every organization, with every team. And that really feeds into that first point you made, just making sure that everyone feels safe to be part of the team, part of the conversation, that they can be in the process of learning and developing and growing as they go, because that is one of the big challenges in this space. I'm a straight cisgender white dude. I feel like I, am fairly up to speed on these topics and the language and all that kind of stuff. And I certainly try to be an ally, but I recognize my privilege, and I recognize, that on the one hand, I can't leave the work to others, but, on the one hand, I can't leave the work to others, but on the other hand, it's also not my place perhaps to be the voice. And I need to give other people, the opportunity to have their voice be heard and shared. And that sometimes is a tightrope to walk, and it can be challenging. And sometimes I mess up, and I just don't do it in the most effective way. And I would say that is, someone I think I'm fairly attuned and aware of the issues. And you get other people who are really well intentioned, but they're not particularly conversant. They're not experienced in this space. It can be really intimidating for people to want to wade in and to try, because they just feel like they're going to get labeled, they're going to get, and there's going to be all these negative impacts for them. So they'd rather just stay quiet and let others do the work. And so that's the wrestle. I think that's the tension in the space that we have to try to overcome by creating psychologically safe spaces where people can learn and grow, and where we celebrate that, right, over time.
Absolutely. And, and so much of the work that's happening, we have this tendency to want to race towards the explicit, apparent change that can be seen publicly without, as you said, really creating the place of psychological safety that's necessary to delve into these topics that are hard and multi-generational and visceral and guttural for some. And so for me, if you start at the structural change level, as you said, you want to be able to change the resource flows and your policies and your practices, but more importantly, without understanding, I'm in a psychologically safe space to process and to learn. Can you then take on, power dynamics and the connections and the mental, various mental models that then take us from the want to have this explicit thing kind of drive our identity in this work versus the implicit transformative change that is necessary for the long-term global impact that one wants to make.
Yeah, excellent. And again, this is a challenging and fraught space. I'm curious, what motivates you and keeps you inspired to keep going with the work, to keep pressing forward despite the challenges, and frankly, despite often the setbacks. I think it's been a pretty turbulent time over the last few years. I think back, there's been ongoing challenges and issues, to be sure, but if you go back to the early days of the pandemic, for example, and we think about the summer of 2020, what an incredibly challenging time. I can't even imagine how people of color were functioning and dealing with the social upheaval and the challenges around the George Floyd moment, for example. That's just one example of like a gazillion. It's been a really challenging time. So what keeps you inspired and motivated in this space, even amidst those challenges?
That's a great question. Thank you for that. I definitely look back at the summer of 2020, and particularly in Madison, the things that we saw here as protests and teach-ins and things were happening. I think that actually really gave me the second wind that I needed. Most of the protests, we had very few violent interactions between protesters and police compared to other cities, but most of the work was led by young black and brown Madisonians who wanted to pick up the mantle for change. And so watching middle schoolers and high schoolers and young adults really be front and center of how the community tackled this conversation, because in Madison, like many places that are, quote unquote progressive, we struggle with our external identity of being, a quote unquote progressive, diverse city, and how the power dynamics and connections prevent that from benefiting people of color and others from disadvantaged communities. So I think watching their motivation and their intention really helped, and I continue to look to them as a resource. I also have to do a lot of self-care. I believe I follow the NAP ministry, which is a very popular justice-driven rest team or organization that talks about rest is power, rest is restorative, but rest is an act of courage and justice, and we deserve it. And so I try to take time away, and then mental health resources also help to keep the balance, because you have to be able to do the work but also care for yourself in a way that all of the information and the stories and the trauma that you're absorbing in the course of that work doesn't negatively affect everything else you do in your life, my family, my friends, my other work, so what have you.
Yeah, we definitely need to be practicing self-care, making sure that we're putting our mental, physical, emotional, spiritual, intellectual health, at the forefront, and really taking care of those needs, and focusing not just on ourselves and that self-care, but also, if we're a leader, making sure that we're recognizing those needs in the members of our team, so that we can encourage them to also practice that self-care, and we can provide the space for them, the opportunity for them to do that. Equally important. As we get close to wrapping up today, perhaps we can end off the conversation by just talking a little bit more about what people often get wrong or misunderstand about this work in diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, belonging. What do people misunderstand? What are they getting wrong? And how can we reframe it for people in a way that will resonate and make sense so that we can carry the work forward?
One I mentioned earlier is that DEI work is, contrary to popular belief, not the sole responsibility of HR leaders, as is the case in many organizations. McKinsey and Company did some research on workplace diversity with SHRM a couple of years ago, and saw that there was this wide gap in performance, but also in how DEI resources are then allocated to departments, and the large discrepancies that there are there. Most importantly, it's DEI diversity is not primarily about race and genders or just underrepresented employee groups. We need to be able to understand it and walk in these values across the spectrum of diversity, including culture, socioeconomic status, religion, political perspective. Disability is one that I'm doing a lot more advocacy for. And also that it's not a fad. This is not something that's going away. They are values that we live out in myriad ways, but the work that organizations do and that we do in ourselves is about coming to shared understandings and shared definitions of what those values mean, and what walking in them or living in them means in any number of contexts. And so, looking at all that and knowing that, there is a vast return on investment when you do this work, we want to be able to keep organizations running effectively. We want lower turnover. We want increased satisfaction. We want all of that. And we also want to, look at, risk reduction and business compliance pieces too. But when you look at all this together, you're creating opportunities to help the people that work for you and with you do their work well. And that's the goal for many businesses and organizations. So doing this can only help increase the efficacy of any team or organization, and there's no reason not to start.
Yeah, well said, Daniel. It has just been a real pleasure. I know at the time I need to let you go here in just a few minutes, but before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with my audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Absolutely. If I would love for folks to join our mailing list at simsconsultinggroup.com. You could reach out to us for speaking engagements, free consultations on things that might be happening in your organization at info@dsconsultinggroup.net. And follow us on LinkedIn. Every other Friday, I do a newsletter called Transformation in Progress. That we took a bit of a hiatus this summer, but we're starting back this fall with a number of new topics that we want to share about various aspects of DEI leadership and self-care that we think are important. And as far as the final word, I think that as I reflect on the almost 15 years of work that I've done in this space, the thing that I find most interesting from the many trainings and sessions that I've done is that we don't give our society and people within it the opportunity to let their ability to learn and change shine enough. DEI is working in a lot of avenues while there's still a lot of work to do. Some of the change that I've seen, in individuals in various training environments, really reinforces for me the power of learning on changing minds and changing attitudes, and giving folks the appropriate space to confront things that we are taught that are wrong or untrue or half true, and in whatever case they might be. And seeing that marked change in how they walk, how they listen, how they respond, is something that, if only for that, it makes going on this journey worth the investment and the time. And so I hope that folks reflect on that and think about how that looks for them. And we're here to help navigate that with you if and when the time comes.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Daniel. It's been a real pleasure. I encourage my audience to reach out, to get connected, find out more about what Daniel and his team can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Do you enjoy the Human Capital Innovations podcast? Enjoy ad-free listening by going to the Patreon page. And please consider contributing even at the producer or sponsorship level. And please leave a review. Thank you for your support. Thanks again for joining us for this episode of the Human Capital Innovations Podcast. I hope you stay healthy and safe and that you have a great week.